Hi, I'm Arden. I buried my husband, and then watched his mother set fire to my military uniform at his funeral. She looked me in the eye and said, "Pack your bags. Never come back." No one stopped her, not even my husband's sister. I wasn't just grieving him. I was grieving the life we built that his family erased in a matter of days. They rewrote his will, deleted our wedding photos, and even tried to prove I never existed in his world. But the question that keeps me up isn't why they did it. It's how long they planned it. The wind that afternoon carried more weight than just Texas heat. It was dry and sharp, cutting across the lawn like it had somewhere urgent to be. Like it knew this wasn't a funeral. Not really. Not for me. I stood under the white canopy outside the funeral home in Fort Worth, straight-backed, heels digging silently into the grass. The casket had already been lowered hours ago. What remained now was everything they didn't want to say, and everything I couldn't. I wore my military dress uniform, the same one I'd folded 100 times with precision. The one Malric always said made me look like I could command a storm and still hold his hand steady through it. I'd worn it for every homecoming, every ceremony, every goodbye. But never for something like this. I was about to turn away when I heard the gravel crunch behind me. I didn't have to look. I knew it was her. Isolde, my mother-in-law, never moved without that sharp, rehearsed grace, like every step was part of some performance she was staging for an invisible audience. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she held up a bundle, my pressed uniform, folded so carefully in the bag I left it in this morning. And then she walked past me, slow and deliberate, toward the rusted fire pit at the far end of the yard. My breath stuck. "Isolde, what are you doing?" She didn't answer, didn't flinch. She opened the bag, shook out the fabric like she was preparing a tablecloth for some spiteful dinner, and dropped it into the pit. Her hands moved with certainty, no hesitation. She reached into her coat and pulled out a lighter. The click echoed louder than it should have. One flick, and in seconds, the flames swallowed what had taken me years to earn. The silver buttons curled, the fabric blackened and folded inward. "You're not a Henderson anymore," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut clean through the murmurs. "This uniform, just a costume, theater. He's gone, and with him, whatever you thought you were owed." Behind me, someone gasped. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. It wasn't just fabric. It was everything. Everything I had fought for, bled for, earned under the sun and over desert sands. Everything Malric used to press for me before ceremonies, murmuring how proud he was under his breath like it was our little secret. I didn't say a word. Around us, the crowd shifted, uncomfortable, but no one moved to stop her. Seraphine, the sister-in-law who wore grief like pearls, just stared at the smoke, lips tight. A few averted their eyes. Someone whispered, "This isn't the time." But no one stepped forward. No one stepped for me. A cold breath slid through me. I scanned the crowd, faces I'd shared holidays with, tables I'd set with my own hands. Every single one looked away. It wasn't the fire that burned the most. It was their silence. My fingers twitched at my sides. I thought about shouting, about calling the police. But what would I say? She burned a part of me that isn't tangible but means more than the ring you gave back yesterday? No. Malric's voice echoed faintly in my head, calm, reassuring, the way he always sounded when I was ready to break something. "If anything happens to me, don't let them take your voice." And yet, there I stood, mute, frozen. Terrell stood near the back, former soldier under my command, out of uniform today, but standing like he never left it. He made a step forward, just a half step, before someone next to him placed a hand on his arm. He didn't protest. He looked at me instead. A quiet nod. He'd seen enough. He remembered what respect looked like, even when no one else did. I took a slow breath. My throat burned, but I wasn't crying. Not yet. I turned, not toward the house, but toward the path leading back to my car. The fire behind me crackled, but I didn't look back. I didn't have to. The scent of scorched fabric clung to the wind. Halfway to the parking lot, I stopped. I crouched down, lifted what the fire had spit out. A singed patch, half a button, twisted beyond recognition. I didn't know why I kept it, only that I couldn't leave it there. My palms stung from the heat, but I didn't flinch. I wrapped the pieces in a handkerchief and placed them gently into my purse. Standing again, I faced the open road. The house behind me, the life I thought I'd be a part of forever, was fading into background noise. I came here to say goodbye to my husband. But it looks like I'll also be saying goodbye to the life I thought we built. The drive back from the funeral didn't feel like returning home. The steering wheel beneath my hands felt foreign, like I'd borrowed someone else's life and forgotten how to return it. Every turn I took toward that two-story brick house scraped across my nerves. Malric and I had built a rhythm there, a life that felt earned, not borrowed. But now it was just coordinates on a map leading to a place that had chosen to forget me. I parked at the curb instead of pulling into the driveway. It no longer felt like a spot reserved for me. The yard was silent, save for the wind nudging the wind chimes that Malric's niece had made one Christmas. The sound used to comfort me. Now it sounded off-key. Isolde stood in the open doorway when I reached the steps, a black garment bag draped over her arm. She didn't greet me, didn't ask if I was okay. Her eyes flicked from my uniform to the small overnight bag I carried. "I assume you won't make a spectacle today," she said, holding out the bag. "This will do just fine." I didn't take it immediately. "What is it?" "Something more appropriate," she replied, her voice crisp. "You've made enough of a scene already. If you want to say goodbye like a Henderson, wear something that doesn't scream rank." I took the bag in silence and walked inside. The house still smelled faintly of Malric's cologne, woodsy and subtle, but the warmth that usually came with it was gone. The furniture hadn't moved, but the energy had. Rooms I'd once felt safe in now hummed with tension. Every photo of us that used to hang in the hallway had been replaced with older ones. Malric as a boy, Malric with his father, Malric with Seraphine. I climbed the stairs to the guest room, not the room we had shared, but the one they used for relatives who overstayed. I changed into the dress Isolde gave me, black, high-collared, completely plain. I looked like a background character in someone else's grief, but I buttoned it anyway. At the chapel, I had prepared a short speech, nothing grand, just a few words to honor him, to remind people who he was to me. I'd sent the draft ahead of time. The funeral home had approved it, but when I stood to approach the podium, the funeral director leaned in and whispered, "There's been a change. Only immediate family will speak." I blinked. "I'm his wife." He didn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The family requested it." I sat back down slowly, my heart pounding with restrained fury. Across the aisle, Seraphine stood at the mic, a delicate tremble in her voice as she recited lines that sounded rehearsed. She said Malric loved his roots, his upbringing, the values their parents instilled in him. She never mentioned the last 12 years of his life, never mentioned me. I wasn't just mourning my husband, I was mourning the right to speak his name. As she walked past my pew on her way back, Seraphine brushed her fingers lightly across my shoulder. She leaned in with a perfumed whisper, "We thought it best." That single line did more than sting. It finalized something I hadn't wanted to admit, that I was no longer family, not in their eyes, not even in death. I didn't react. Instead, I opened my purse, unfolded the note cards I'd prepared, and tore them gently in half. I left them on the pew, a fragment of my voice among the silent betrayals. After the service, while others filtered into the reception room for catered sadness and filtered coffee, I walked alone to my car. The dress itched against my skin. I stopped halfway down the gravel path, needing a moment to breathe where no one could reach me. I pulled over on a quiet side road a few miles away. The late afternoon sun had started to dip low behind the cottonwood trees, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I stared out through the windshield, my hands still resting on the steering wheel. Then, I reached for my phone and tapped the name that hadn't lit up on my screen in months. The line rang once, then again, and then he answered. "Cassian," I said, voice steady. There was a beat of silence before I spoke again. "It's time." When I stepped through the front door, it was as if the house inhaled me and never exhaled. The air inside was thick, not from dust or lack of circulation, but from something weightier. It was quiet, but not the kind that soothed. The walls didn't echo anymore. They absorbed every footstep, every breath, like the space was learning to forget I had ever belonged there. I stood in the entryway longer than I meant to, letting my eyes adjust. The hall still held the same coat rack, the same umbrella that leaned just slightly to the left. Nothing had moved, and yet everything felt rearranged. It wasn't just a house now, it was a statement, and that statement was clear. This was no longer mine. I walked upstairs to Malric's study, my heels silent on the hard wood. I hadn't been in that room since before the hospital, back when we still argued over whether to keep the books alphabetized or stacked by color. The door creaked open as I pushed it, and for a moment it was like I'd cracked open a sealed vault of memory. The desk was clean, too clean, not a single paper out of place. I opened the top drawer, and my breath caught. A folder sat inside, thicker than it looked, labeled in Malric's handwriting. Final instructions. With a slight tremor in my hand, I flipped it open. A draft of a will, dated 4 months ago, and nearly every line pointed to me. Beneficiary of the trust, executor of his estate, sole inheritor of the property we'd restored together piece by piece. But there was no signature, no notary, just a name typed at the bottom and a line left empty. Had he meant to sign it? Had he been stopped? Or had he hesitated? I sank into the chair, the page shaking in my grip. Trust unspoken is the cruelest kind. You can't defend it in court. You can only carry the weight of what might have been said if time had allowed. The silence in the house pressed heavier then. I left the folder on the desk and walked down the hallway. The photos had always been there, vacation shots, candid laughter from family dinners, moments we once thought would define decades. But now there was a blank spot, right where our wedding photo used to be. I searched every shelf, every closet. The albums, gone. The frame, missing. Not misplaced, erased. The memory of Malric picking that photo, smiling in the kitchen as he said, "This one goes in the middle. That's home." Not anymore. Something cracked inside me, not loudly, not all at once. Just the quiet shift of realization settling into bone. They had started erasing me before he even died. I'd just been too busy loving him to notice. The holiday cards that excluded my name. The family dinners where Seraphine called me the soldier instead of my name. The way Isolde would introduce me as Malric's wife with a tone that stripped it of meaning. This wasn't grief. This was design. A long game of erasure, carefully plotted and finally played. I went back to the study and sat again at the desk. I opened my phone, scrolling to the folder marked legal. I began cataloging everything: documents, assets, account numbers. I opened the drawer where Malric used to keep our banking records. Empty. Every file folder was gone, wiped clean like I was never meant to be part of the picture. I took a breath, not the shaky kind, the kind that comes before the first move in a long, calculated game. I typed out a message. Found the will, unfinished, starting from scratch. Meet me Tuesday? I hit send. Then, I stood and walked to the hallway again. I pulled an old frame from my tote, a photo of me in uniform, taken just weeks before deployment. I had brought it back from my last base without thinking. Now, it felt like it had been waiting for this moment. I hung it on the wall where our wedding photo had been. Alone. Unapologetic. If they won't remember me as his wife, they'll damn well remember me as something greater. I pulled into the Henderson driveway just before noon. The sun was high, but the air felt colder than it should have. The house didn't look any different, but somehow, it felt like I was trespassing. I parked at the edge, engine idling a moment longer than necessary. Then I cut it and stepped out. Isolde stood at the threshold, arms folded, posture sharp. In her hand was a small velvet box. "You have 30 minutes," she said. "No need for conversation." I walked past her in silence, my boots brushing against the welcome mat that never truly meant the word. Just before I could step through the door, she thrust the box into my hands. "Take this," she said flatly. "It doesn't belong here anymore." I looked at it, but didn't open it. "It was never yours to decide where it belongs," I said quietly. I stepped into the house without waiting for a reply, but the heat behind my chest burned with the weight of her timing. The guest room door was already open. A single trash bag sat near the closet, bulging at the seams. I didn't need to look to know what it contained, my life reduced to items unceremoniously stuffed into plastic. But first, I sat down on the bed and opened the velvet box. Inside sat my wedding band, simple, gold, still carrying the slight scratch from when Malric dropped it nervously on our wedding day. I hadn't even noticed it missing during the funeral. My fingers brushed the inside of the lid, nothing else, just the ring, silently accusing. I closed my eyes and let the memory drift back. Malric's voice, raspy and anxious that morning years ago. "This is the only ring that ever made sense to me, you know? Not the one I gave you, the one you gave me, because it meant someone finally saw me and stayed. But now that same ring sat cold in my palm, passed back like a library book overdue." From the hallway, I heard faint voices, Seraphine's, unmistakably sharp. "I mean, come on," she said, barely lowering her voice. "Key, marrying a soldier, it's always about the benefits." A laugh. Then another voice, a cousin maybe. "They get free everything, housing, insurance, hell, even funeral services." The words didn't stab, they scraped. Not because they were true, but because they were so far from it. I remembered the ER room overseas, the night I collapsed from dehydration after a patrol. Malric had flown halfway across the world just to sit beside me. He told the nurse, "She's the only reason I come home." But here I was just another box on their checklist. I walked to the closet and pulled out the bag. At the bottom, my framed commendation certificate. Cracked glass, the frame warped like someone had stepped on it. A stack of cards I'd sent Malric over the years, rubber banded together like they were clutter. A mug from our first vacation, broken at the handle. I didn't need to be told it wasn't an accident. No one is that careless with other people's memories unless they mean to be. "This isn't just eviction," I murmured to myself, gripping the frame tighter. "It's erasure." I didn't cry. I packed, one item at a time. No rush, no panic. Just order, just control. When the last bag was zipped, I wheeled it down the hallway. I passed the living room where Seraphine and her cousin were now quiet. Neither looked up as I walked through. At the front door, Isolde waited, I didn't speak. I placed the velvet box on the table beside her without meeting her eyes. As I stepped outside, I pulled my phone from my coat pocket. Confirmed Tuesday, 9 a.m. I texted Cassian. I want to talk about rights and receipts. The trunk clicked shut behind me. That sound was louder than any door slam. It was the sound of a line being drawn, a final item checked off. I started the car but didn't drive right away. I pulled the ring from my coat pocket and stared at it in the center of my palm. I didn't throw it. That would have made it too easy to forget. Instead, I opened the glove compartment and set it inside, face down, buried beneath a folder of documents. Let them think they'd returned it. One day, I'll return it with interest. The drive to Cassian's office was quiet, too quiet for my thoughts to hide behind anything. The hum of the tires over the pavement offered no distraction. Truths lose power when they arrive too late. But I hadn't lost mine. I just hadn't used it yet. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, I'd already recited my questions in my head a dozen times. I wasn't there to ask for closure. I was there to reclaim what had been mine before anyone decided otherwise. Cassian greeted me with a nod, the kind you give someone at war, not a handshake. He always knew when not to fill silence with small talk. He gestured me toward the conference room, where a thick folder already sat open at my seat. "These are the property transfers," he said, flipping a page. "Filed 3 weeks before Malrick's death. His name appears as the grantor. Everything, this house, the lake property, and even the secondary account, was signed over to Seraphine." I leaned forward. "Signed over. As in done?" "Legally binding," he confirmed, "but not unbreakable. If we can show coercion or incapacity, we have options." My chest tightened, not with surprise, but with the cold realization that something had shifted under me long before the funeral. He never told me, not once. Cassian studied me, saying nothing. I didn't need sympathy. I needed strategy. A memory slipped in uninvited. Months ago, dinner at the Henderson house. Seraphine had twirled her wine glass in that slow, deliberate way she had when she was softening the blow of whatever she planned to say. "You don't really care about this house, do you, Arden?" she asked, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's just brick to you. Temporary." No, it wasn't just brick. It was where Malrick had promised me forever. It was where we argued over furniture, where we spent quiet Sundays doing nothing that felt like everything. It was the last place I heard him laugh without restraint. Cassian cleared his throat. "There's more." Of course there was. He handed me a printed transcript. "This came from the estate mediator." It was an off-the-record comment. I scanned the page and paused halfway through. They didn't think a woman in uniform could be a nurturing spouse. I read it again, and then again. "They," I repeated slowly. "His family?" Cassian nodded. "It was inferred. They believed you couldn't balance both roles." I felt my body go still, not in shock, more like containment. I could feel every fiber of rage, every indignation pressing up against the inside of my ribs. I remembered that promotion ceremony on base. Malrick stood alone in the crowd, still in his civilian coat, a bit awkward but proud. His hands trembled as he clapped. He never said much in public, but I caught the way he looked at me, like he couldn't believe the person they were honoring was someone who came home to him. Let them believe I was never meant for that life. They'd learn soon enough how wrong they were. I pulled out my notebook and began writing. Subpoena internal emails, financial forensic review. Request court order to reopen the unsigned will, verify handwriting, track login IPs for the estate account. Cassian glanced at me. "You're not going to let this die quiet, are you?" "I don't need to win in their hearts," I said. just in court." He smiled. "That's the spirit." I gathered my things and stepped out into the hallway. On the courthouse steps just outside Cassian's office, a young widow knelt to place a bouquet of lilies under a plaque etched with the names of the fallen. She stood slowly, brushed her uniform skirt, and met my gaze for just a moment. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Recognition happens quietly sometimes, like soldiers spotting each other across a crowd without saluting. By the time I reached my car, the sun had dipped behind the adjacent building, casting the lot in a pale orange hue. I sat for a second, letting the engine idle while I sorted through what came next. My phone buzzed with a new message. "Seraphine, we know you've been digging. Don't embarrass yourself, Arden." I read it once, smirked, then set the phone face down on the passenger seat, shifted into gear, and pulled out. "I'm not here to embarrass myself. I'm here to bury your lies. They didn't evict me, they demoted me." That was the first thought that struck me as I stepped over the Henderson threshold again, this time without ceremony, without welcome. Isolde didn't say a word. She simply turned and led me toward the stairs, away from the master bedroom Malric and I had shared, and into the cramped guest room near the back hallway. The door was already open. Inside, a single duffel bag sat on the bed, surrounded by cardboard boxes that weren't sealed but clearly meant for departure. The room looked like a motel stopover, not the place where a widow gathered the remains of her marriage. The air was sharp with lemon cleaner, almost like someone had scrubbed the memory of me out of the space. On the desk, a stack of ivory thank you cards lay fanned out, waiting to be mailed. I picked one up. The wording was as generic as expected, but what caught my eye was the signature block. "With love, the Henderson family." No mention of me, not as Malric's wife. Not as anything. I walked out into the hallway, found Seraphine in the kitchen, arranging petit fours on a silver tray like she was hosting a baby shower. "You cut me out of his goodbye," I said flatly. She didn't flinch. "It's not your name that matters, Arden. It's his memory." "That's funny," I replied, because everything he remembered about himself had me in it. Seraphine smiled in that saccharine way people do when they think they've already won. Some memories fade faster than others. I turned on my heel before I said something I'd regret, but as I passed the foyer, I saw movement at the front door. Tyrell, dressed in fatigues, holding a modest bouquet of carnations and a folded envelope. He caught my eye and gave me a polite nod, then stepped forward, only to be blocked by Isolde. "This is a family matter," she said coldly, "not a military one." I stepped into the hall just in time to see Tyrell pause. His jaw clenched as she continued, "Showing up like that is inappropriate. This isn't a base, it's a home." I walked up beside them. "Funny, because it stopped being a home the day you decided who did and didn't belong." Tyrell looked at me, then back at Isolde. He gave her a crisp nod, handed her the flowers, and stepped back. Later, I pulled him aside by the walkway. "I'm sorry. You shouldn't have had to deal with that." He shook his head. "She said I was disrespecting the moment by showing up in uniform." I smiled sadly. "She's the one who disrespected the uniform and the man we both served alongside by pretending the people who stood beside him didn't matter." Inside again, I began sorting through my things. Every item I touched came with a new pang. Some were packed sloppily, picture frames without padding, mugs chipped, documents bent or missing altogether. My framed medal of commendation had shattered glass across the front. My wedding album was nowhere to be found. I opened my laptop and began cataloging everything: what was missing, what had been damaged, what had been purposefully left out. Receipts. That's what Cassian always said. Don't argue with emotion, argue with receipts. As I zipped up the last duffel, Seraphine appeared in the doorway. "Don't drag this through courts, Arden," she said coolly. "You won't win. He's gone. You're gone." I didn't raise my voice. "Then why are you still so afraid I might show up?" She blinked. Just once. Then turned and disappeared down the hallway. Back home, I locked the front door behind me and dropped my bags near the entry table. The house was quiet, not empty, just waiting. I opened the small fireproof box in the hallway closet and retrieved the USB drive Malric had given me once during a deployment. He had said, "For emergencies only, and no, Arden, forgetting to pay the water bill doesn't count." I slid it into the laptop and typed in the passphrase I'd memorized years ago. One folder, encrypted, labeled, "If something happens to me." I stared at the screen, not moving. Grief doesn't make me weak. It made me ready. I didn't know grief could be forged, but as I sat in my apartment, surrounded by boxes I hadn't bothered unpacking, Seraphine's text echoed through my head like a taunt I couldn't delete. "We know you've been digging. Don't embarrass yourself, Arden." Their grief wasn't about honoring Malric. It was about controlling who got to remember him out loud. I sipped lukewarm coffee, staring at the glow of my laptop. My email pinged. "Cassian." Subject line, "You'll want to see this." I opened the attachment. It was a scanned letter, printed in soft cursive font on thick paper, titled "Malric's Farewell to the Family." Below the scripted heading was a note supposedly penned by Malric before his death, except it wasn't. Cassian's voice cut through my thoughts on the speakerphone. "They're calling it a final testament. Says he wanted the family to carry on without distractions. No mention of you, no acknowledgement." I scrolled down. He never used this phrasing. "Let go of the past and protect our legacy." He didn't speak in Hallmark quotes. "I figured," Cassian replied. "You're not in it, and it's dated 3 days before he was admitted. Timing's suspicious. Language, too." I leaned back, eyes stinging, not with tears, but rage. "It reads like they're trying to write me out of his life posthumously." Cassian sighed. "We'll get a forensic linguist if we need to. Start preparing your affidavit." I let silence stretch, then said, "He once told me, 'I've never written a sentence without you in it.' He meant it. This isn't him." That afternoon, I pulled out my backup drive and started reviewing our digital life. Photos, videos, shared docs, all cataloged over a decade, except now there were holes. Our wedding folder was empty. Anniversary clips, the beach trip we took to Port Aransas, vanished. I opened our shared cloud account. In the activity log, an IP address tied to Seraphine's home had accessed it 3 weeks before Malric passed. Quiet hands, working in the dark. They weren't erasing files, they were rewriting truth. Cassian called again. "We're moving forward with digital forensics. I've already contacted 2 firms in DC. One specializes in metadata recovery." "Good," I said. "I'm drafting the affidavit. I'll walk you through the timeline with receipts." He chuckled lightly. "Memory is admissible, if structured. Let's structure it." So I structured it. Military precise. I opened 3 windows. One for dates, one for documents, one for emotions I refused to soften. I listed every decision Malric made in the last year. Home repairs he insisted I approve, financial moves we made jointly, calls to the VA we handled together. His trust wasn't casual, it was consistent. When the sun dipped behind the skyline, I paused, not because I was tired, but because I knew what I needed. I reached for a book on the shelf, our anniversary journal. Inside, folded neatly between pages, was a handwritten note from our 4th year. "There are a million reasons why life gets messy," You're the one I'm always willing to clean it up with. Signed in his hurried, messy scrawl. I scanned it, saved it, tagged it. Not for proof, but for preservation. They were trying to turn my love into fiction, but I had the footnotes. Later that night, at 9:52 p.m., my phone rang. Cassian's name flashed across the screen. "You're not going to believe this," he said without preamble. "There's a second letter." I sat up. "What kind?" "Also a farewell. But this one's notarized." I didn't respond right away. I reached over, closed my laptop slowly, then stood and walked to the window. "If they forged his words once," I said, voice steady, "they'll pay for every comma. Some storms you don't wait out, you walk into them." That morning, I dressed in my uniform, not for nostalgia, not for defense, but as declaration. Every pressed seam, every polished pin reminded me who I was long before they tried to erase it. By the time I reached the Henderson estate, the sun was already sharp, heat rolling off the pavement like static. I didn't wait for the doorbell. I walked in. They were already seated in the living room. Isolde perched on the edge of her chair, expression tight. Seraphine stood behind her, arms crossed, as if she was holding the entire house up with her shoulders. Several cousins lingered on the sofa and in the kitchen doorway, murmuring like an audience unsure whether the play had started. Cassian's laptop was already open on the coffee table. His face filled the screen, professional and calm. "Thank you all for coming," Cassian began. "As counsel for Mrs. Henderson, I'm here to formally notify the family of an active lawsuit being filed for wrongful manipulation of estate documentation and spoliation of evidence." The room stilled. Only the distant hum of the air conditioning dared interrupt. "We will be moving forward with discovery," Cassian continued, "and with public statements if the matter escalates." Isolde snapped first. "You're a disgrace, Arden. This is not how decent people handle grief." I met her eyes squarely. "Then let the courts decide what disgrace looks like. I've faced worse than your judgment." From the hallway, a knock interrupted. Tyrell stepped inside holding his phone. "You should all see this," he said. He turned the screen toward the group. A video played. Isolde throwing my uniform into the fire pit, the flames leaping as guests looked away. The caption read, "This is how a military widow was treated by her in-laws. Remember her name." Veteran groups had already picked it up. The video had been shared over 20,000 times. "You don't burn a soldier's past and expect peace," one comment read. "This isn't just shameful, it's cultural betrayal." Isolde's face paled. Seraphine glanced around, her poise cracking. I looked around the room. "I don't need to raise my voice. The world already is." Seraphine snapped back, voice thin with rage. "You were a placeholder. He would have come back to us. You were temporary." I stood still. "He never left you, but he chose me. You just never forgave him for it." There was a beat of silence. Then one of Malric's cousins stood up. "I was at their wedding," she said softly. He looked at her like she was gravity. Another voice from the back. "You crossed a line, Isolde. A deep one." And just like that, the room split. Lines weren't drawn with chalk. They were carved in glances, in footsteps out the door, in who sat back down and who couldn't. Cassian cleared his throat through the screen. "There is one more matter. We've uncovered a hidden trust established 4 years ago. Sole beneficiary, Arden." Seraphine opened her mouth, then closed it. Her expression dropped, not into sadness, but into panic. Cassian looked directly into the camera. "The trust holds stock options and private savings that were never disclosed to the estate committee. It is legally binding, and it overrides the previous property transfers." I didn't flinch. I didn't gloat. but I looked Isolde in the eye and said, "You thought you were burying me. Turns out you were digging your own hole." The louder the cover-up, the sharper the truth cuts when it arrives. As I walked out of the Henderson house, the marble under my boots echoed a rhythm they hadn't expected, a woman not backing down, but walking forward. The silence that once held power over me now belonged to them. I didn't need to slam a door. I just had to leave one open behind me, with evidence trailing out like breadcrumbs. Cassian called me an hour later while I sat on the balcony of my apartment nursing a second cup of untouched coffee. "We found it," he said. "A trust account tied directly to the Henderson construction firm. Quiet, long-standing, and very much real." I blinked. "Let me guess. My name?" "Sole beneficiary," he confirmed. "It's been receiving profit shares for the past 4 years. Malric protected it. He separated it from the rest. No co-signers, no trustees, but you." I set the mug down gently. My hands didn't tremble, but they wanted to. "He never mentioned it." "Not once." "I think he meant for it to speak for itself if he couldn't," Cassian replied. "He did this knowing what they were capable of." My mind reeled back to a night in our kitchen, the clink of dishes as Malric loaded the dishwasher, and I read over a lease renewal. "I just want to make sure that if anything ever happens," he had said, "you're covered." At the time, I thought he meant life insurance. I didn't realize he meant war. I spent the next morning reviewing the trust records. It was legitimate. Quiet deposits every quarter, signed with a private account that Seraphine and Isolde had no access to. But that didn't stop them from trying to claim everything else. That same day, I received a tip from a mutual friend, one of Seraphine's less tactful cousins. "Check online," she messaged. "You're not going to like it." She was right. Several listings had gone up under Seraphine's name. Estate clearance, she'd written. Vintage items, sentimental pieces. One caught my eye immediately, a silver watch with a worn leather strap engraved inside. 5 years in, forever to go. M. My anniversary gift. She didn't just want to erase me, she wanted to profit from it. I sent the screenshots to Cassian. He responded within minutes. "This supports the claim for will manipulation and intent to defraud the estate. Let's include it in the next round." By the end of the week, headlines had started to surface. Military widow fights back against estate erasure. Terrell had helped release a statement to veteran advocacy groups, backed with a public version of the uniform burning video, select legal documents, and Cassian's carefully crafted narrative. This wasn't a fight over money. This was about identity, about legacy, about honoring what was built together, not what was stolen afterward. I received interview requests from NPR, The Washington Post, and even a podcast that spotlighted female veterans navigating civilian injustice. I didn't say yes, not yet. But the moment I saw the wave of support, comments, donations to legal funds, fellow widows reaching out, I framed the trust account statement and placed it on my bookshelf. Not for pride, not for decoration, for proof. It's not about proving I was loved, it's about proving I mattered. Late that night, Cassian forwarded another file. Pulled from Malric's old office voicemail system, he wrote. It was archived on the cloud. "Might want to brace yourself." I played the audio. Seraphine's voice. "We both know she was never really part of us. He would have wanted the family to take care of things." I sat still, letting the words settle. Not like dust, like stone. She didn't steal from me. She stole from his memory. Some debts are paid in dollars, others are paid in silence broken. I walked into Cassian's office dressed in navy slacks, blazer buttoned with intent, and a soft gray blouse that said I wasn't here to mourn. I was here to execute. I wasn't in uniform because this war wasn't fought on a battlefield. This was litigation, precision, patience, leverage. Cassian looked up from his desk and gave a single approving nod. You look exactly how you should for today. They gambled I wouldn't fight, I said, placing my bag on the floor and sitting. But I've never left a battlefield unfinished. He pushed a folder across the table. The Department of Defense just sent this. You're going to want to read it. The letterhead alone made my stomach tighten, but not with fear. It was formal, stern, but clear. An internal investigation had been opened regarding the destruction of military property. My uniform, burned, documented, viral, and now backed by the federal government. They crossed a line, Cassian said. Now, the government's on your side too. I exhaled slowly, the letter still in my hand. She didn't just burn my past. She lit a fire under the very law she thought couldn't touch her. He smiled faintly. Let's turn up the heat. Before I could respond, there was a knock. Terrell stepped in, a small, sealed bag in hand. Found something, he said, eyes narrowed with disgust. Under your driver's seat. I didn't think much of it until I scanned the barcode. He dropped it on Cassian's desk. Inside, a GPS tracker. Cassian's expression hardened. We'll trace it, if it links to who I think it does. It didn't take long. A shell company, tied to the Henderson estate, had activated the device days after Malrick's death, meaning someone hadn't just wanted me gone. They wanted to track where I went, who I spoke to, what I might be planning. I looked at Cassian. Use it, as harassment, as evidence, as motive. He nodded. You sure? Absolutely. We spent the next hour drafting my deposition. I wrote every word with intention. I didn't soften the truth to make it digestible. I made it undeniable. Cassian read silently as I typed, occasionally glancing up to catch my tone. When I finished, I signed the final page and looked down at the line I'd written to close it. What you stand for matters more when you're standing alone. Malrick had said that to me during one of our last nights together. Not after a fight, but after I'd stood up to a superior who questioned my leadership. Now, I was standing again, and this time, I had more than a moral victory to claim. That afternoon, I drove out to the cemetery for the first time since the funeral. The air smelled of wet bark and fresh-cut grass. I walked quietly to Malrick's headstone, pausing only when I reached the edge of the stone. No flowers, no photos, no folded flags. Just the carved name of a man who had lived a split life, one half they claimed, one half I carried. I reached into my coat and pulled out a small case. Inside was the commendation ribbon I'd earned the year we met, my first deployment. I knelt, unfolded it, and placed it beside the stone. I'm not here to grieve, I whispered. I'm here to continue. When I returned home that evening, my phone buzzed just as I kicked off my shoes. It was a message from Cassian. They've counterfiled. Isolde's suing for defamation. I stared at the screen, let out a short breath that was half laugh, half disgust. I typed back, good, let her stand under oath too. Then I placed my phone face down, turned off the overhead light, and stood in the dark. She set the fire. I'm just bringing the light. Some ties don't need to be cut. They just stop holding. That morning, I stood outside the courthouse annex building, watching my own reflection in the glass door before walking through. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It wasn't even about vindication. It was about closing the chapter that had already bled too far into the next. I'm not here to win a war, I told Cassian as we stepped into the mediation room. I'm here to sign the ceasefire. Inside, Isolde and Seraphine sat side by side, arms crossed, expressions blank as stone. Their attorney, a thin man with too much cufflink and not enough spine, barely looked at me. Cassian laid the terms on the table like he was setting down a blueprint, because that's exactly what it was, a plan to rebuild what they thought they'd burned to the ground. I retained full rights to the trust. A formal apology was drafted, though it would never see daylight. Seraphine's profits from the estate sales, nearly $42,000, were to be repaid within 6 months under civil penalty. Isolde was to relinquish any public or private claim to Malric's military honors, including display of his flag, medals, or name in any veteran-affiliated ceremony. Cassian paused before finalizing. "We can continue litigation if you'd prefer. There's still enough in the record to push forward." I stared at the paper. I didn't need them bankrupt. I needed them cornered, remembered. "I don't need her to lose everything," I said quietly. "I just need her to know I'm not hers to erase." Across the room, neither of them flinched, and yet I could feel the walls around them shifting, shrinking. When the documents were signed and the room emptied, I paused in the hallway. Isolde was the last to leave. Her eyes flicked to mine with a mix of something, bitterness maybe, or just exhaustion, but for the first time, she didn't speak with a mask. "He was my son before he was your husband," she said. I didn't blink. "And now he's gone, which means none of us own him anymore." There was nothing left to salvage in that moment. Not resentment, not sympathy, just silence. And that, finally, felt fair. Later that afternoon, I sat on the edge of my bed and dialed the one number I hadn't called since the week Malric died. "Hello?" my mother answered, clipped and distant. "It's me," I said. A beat passed, then dryly, "You chose a life like this. Maybe next time you'll choose one that fits." Before I could answer, she hung up. I set the phone down. No tears, no anger, just a strange, sudden lightness in my chest. Even my roots were shallow. I just never wanted to admit it. I stood, pulled the black funeral dress from my closet, and folded it neatly into a donation bag. It didn't belong to me, not anymore. Maybe it never had. I boxed up the last of Malric's things, cufflinks, an old notebook, a baseball cap he refused to throw out even after it frayed. I didn't cry. I didn't hold them like relics. I packed them with care, with respect, with grace, because grief had already done what it came to do. I didn't need reminders of what hurt. I needed room for what came next. Before sealing the last box, I scribbled a quote on the cardboard lid, something I'd once read on a bulletin board overseas. "Sometimes, the best apology you'll get is the peace you find without it." By dusk, I was on the road. I didn't take the highway. I chose the coastal drive, long and winding, quiet enough to hear my own thoughts without interference. I pulled over at a lookout spot near Mendocino. The air was damp, sea-heavy. I rolled down the window and let the wind do what it does best, strip away what doesn't matter. The ocean stretched out in front of me, still, wide, indifferent. Tomorrow, I'll stop surviving. I'll start building. This wasn't vengeance. This was order restored. I stood before the judge in a modest courtroom in Fort Worth, Texas. No jury, no cameras, just legal counsel and the stifled breathing of two women who'd spent every ounce of grief trying to erase mine. My blouse was crisp, blazer squared across my shoulders. I didn't dress for sympathy. I dressed to finish what was started. "I didn't come to beg for recognition," I said, voice clear and measured. "I came to deliver it, to myself." Isolde sat with her arms folded, lips drawn thin. Seraphine glanced occasionally toward the back, as if still waiting for someone to rush in and pull her out of this, but no one was coming. Cassian presented our case with surgical precision. Emails between Seraphine and a financial planner discussing quiet asset transfers, bank statements showing unauthorized movement of funds, metadata proving login activity under Isolda's name during the deletion of joint files. And the kicker, a notarized letter from Malric, one that matched neither the fake farewell they'd crafted nor the tone of the man I'd loved. This isn't just a case of family miscommunication, Cassian told the court. This is posthumous identity theft. When it was my turn, I kept it short. They didn't just try to erase me, I said. They weaponized my silence. I won't let that happen again. The judge leaned forward. This court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Arden Henderson. The sentence echoed like thunder cracking open a sky that had held too long. You will retain sole access to the trust account, he continued. The defendants will repay misappropriated proceeds totaling $41,862 within 120 days. Further, Mrs. Henderson, Isolda, will be fined for the destruction of federal property, with the charge filed under malicious intent. A public apology will be issued and published through the Texas Bar Association and Veterans Affairs. Seraphine whispered something under her breath. I didn't bother asking what. After the ruling, I didn't linger. I walked outside into the Texas sun, phone vibrating in my pocket, Cassian trailing a few feet behind. I didn't answer any calls, not yet. Instead, I drove straight to the Henderson backyard, once our backyard. The fire pit still sat in the same spot where she'd lit my past like trash. The grass hadn't grown back fully. I knelt, placed a laminated copy of Malric's real letter inside the ring of blackened stone, and pressed it down with a flat rock. That letter had saved me in court. It was the first thing they destroyed, and the last thing I needed to win. I drove north that night. By dawn, I was unpacking boxes in a small white cottage tucked into a quiet bluff near Mendocino. The deed had been signed months ago, buried in the trust Malric had hidden for me. Retreat property, he'd labeled it. He knew I'd need a place to breathe. The cottage had 2 bedrooms, tall windows, and salt in the air. On my first morning, I brewed coffee, opened the windows, and set up a desk overlooking the water. I opened a blank document on my laptop. They'll tell their side, I said aloud to the empty room, but mine will have the receipts. I began typing, slowly at first, then like muscle memory. Paragraphs about loyalty, grief, the things people call resilience but never want to live through. I didn't write to be heard. I wrote to remember. 2 weeks later, an email landed in my inbox. A support group for military widows was hosting a speaking series. They'd read the court brief, seen the headlines, watched the video of the burning uniform. Would I be willing to speak? I replied with one condition. I wanted the final session. They agreed. And that afternoon, I stepped outside, watching the Pacific lean into the rocks below. They thought I came home to bury my past. I came home to rewrite the ending.